All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into Head-First Software Development by Dan Pilone and Russ Miles.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
You know, when you hear software development, you might think, oh, that's not for me. I'm not a programmer.
Right.
But this book is full of stuff that anyone can use, even if you've never written a line of code in your life.
That's one of the things I love about this book, actually.
Yeah.
It takes these concepts that seem really technical at first glance and shows how they apply to everyday life.
Exactly. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
One of the first things the authors talk about is this idea of the Big Bang approach to development,
Oh, yeah, the Big Bang.
where you try to plan everything perfectly up front and then execute it all at once.
Right. Just get it all done in one go.
Like, just launch the entire project in one giant explosion of effort.
Which, as they point out, is often a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem.
In the real world, things change. You
Mhm.
know, requirements change, new information comes up, priorities shift.
It's like trying to hit a moving target while blindfolded.
That's a great analogy. Actually, the book compares it to aiming for a fixed target when the target's actually moving.
Oh, interesting.
You're almost guaranteed to miss.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So instead of that kind of rigid all-or-nothing approach, they advocate for what's called iterative development.
Okay, so break that down for me. What is iterative development?
Well, it's all about breaking a large project down into smaller, more manageable cycles
Okay.
called iterations.
Iterations, got it.
And within each iteration, you go through the entire development process, planning, designing, building, testing, getting feedback, and then you do it again.
So it's like a cycle of constant refinement.
Exactly. You're constantly learning and adapting as you go, you know.
Instead of aiming for perfection from the get-go, you're acknowledging that things are going to change.
Exactly.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense.
It's just a much more, I think, realistic way to approach any complex project.
I think so too.
Whether you're building software, launching a business, or even planning a vacation.
Totally. And speaking of planning, the book also talks about the importance of constant communication with the customer.
Oh, absolutely crucial.
Why is that so important?
Well, because in software development, the customer could be an actual client. It could be your boss. It could even be yourself.
Right.
If it's a personal project you're working on.
Right. Okay.
But the key is to, constantly get feedback and make sure you're building something that actually meets their needs.
So it's not about building what we think is best. It's about understanding what the customer actually wants
Exactly.
and needs.
Right.
And the book talks about some interesting techniques for gathering those requirements.
Yeah, like those blue ski brainstorming sessions.
Blues key. I like that.
You just explore all the possibilities without any constraints,
Yeah. Just get all the ideas out there,
Right.
no matter how crazy they might seem at first.
That's the point.
You like that.
And then there's also the use of user stories.
Okay, what's a user story?
It's a short, simple description of a feature, but from the user's perspective.
Okay, I think I get it.
So it's focused on what the user actually needs the software to do.
I see. That's interesting.
For example, the book uses a fictional dating app called iSwoon throughout.
iSwoon.
Yeah.
Clever.
So imagine you're building this dating app and you realize that that users want to be able to filter potential matches based on shared interests,
Okay.
right? So a user story for that might be, as a user, I want to be able to search for matches based on shared interests so that I can connect with people who have similar hobbies and passions.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right.
It's simple, it's clear,
Exactly.
and it gets right to the point of what the user wants to achieve.
Exactly. That's the goal.
So you have all these user stories, right? And it sounds like each one represents a pretty big chunk of functionality.
Yeah, they can be.
So how do you actually go about breaking down this massive project into manageable pieces that you can actually work on?
Well, that's where the concept of breaking down the user stories into tasks comes into play.
Okay.
So each user story, it represents something that needs to be built, but to make it more manageable, you break it down further.
So you're breaking down the big things into smaller things.
Right, into specific tasks.
Got it.
So for example, let's go back to that iSwoon dating app.
Okay.
So if the user story is, as a user, I want to be able to search for matches based on location, what might some of the tasks be?
Let me think.
Well, you'd probably have tasks like design the search interface, develop the back-end logic to actually query the database, test the search functionality, and so on.
Oh, I see. So you're breaking it down into those concrete steps.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And then the question becomes, well, how long will each of these tasks take?
Yeah, how do you even begin to estimate that?
That's a great question. And that's where a really cool technique comes in that the book talks about. It's called planning poker.
Planning poker. Okay, now I'm intrigued.
Essentially, it's a way for the development team to collaboratively estimate the effort for each task.
Oh, so it's not just one person making a guess in the dark.
Right, the whole team is involved.
Interesting. So how does it work?
Well, they use a deck of cards with different point values.
Yeah.
And each member of the team, they kind of hold up a card to represent their estimate.
So you get everyone's perspective.
Exactly. And it's not just about the points themselves.
It's about the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It forces you to talk about your assumptions, any potential roadblocks.
Oh, I see. So you're surfacing all those hidden complexities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you come to a shared understanding.
That's smart.
Yeah.
So you're not just estimating time, you're kind of mitigating risks before they even become a problem.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
So you've got your estimates for all these tasks,
Right.
and you're starting to get a sense of, like, the overall scope of the project.
Yeah.
But how do you actually, like, track progress and make sure you're staying on track?
Well, that's where the concept of velocity comes in.
Velocity. Okay, tell me more.
So velocity is basically a measure of how much work a team can realistically accomplish in a given time frame, usually an iteration.
So it's like your team speed, basically.
Exactly. And it's calculated based on how much you completed in past iterations.
I see. So it's based on real data, not just, like, wishful thinking.
Right.
So if my team's velocity is, say, 20 story points per week,
Okay.
does that mean we can confidently take on tasks totaling 20 points in that week?
That's the idea. Yeah.
That's so helpful for planning.
Yeah.
It's setting realistic expectations and all that.
Absolutely. It's a crucial metric for project planning.
This is all starting to click for me now.
Good.
I can see how understanding these concepts would be beneficial for anyone,
Yeah, I think so.
even if they're not building software.
Right.
It's really all about breaking things down, estimating effort, working together towards a common goal.
Exactly.
It's a really, it's a really empowering way to think about tackling any complex project.
Absolutely.
And the book just keeps going deeper. It gets into things like good enough design and the importance of refactoring, which we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh, yeah. There's so much more to unpack here.
Okay. Good enough design. I'm intrigued.
Right. Because you would think you want your software to be perfect.
Well, yeah, ideally.
Well, the authors make a really interesting argument that perfection shouldn't be the enemy of progress. In software development and in life, things are constantly changing, right? So instead of getting bogged down and trying to create the perfect solution up front.
You just start with something good enough and then iterate.
Exactly.
So it's about getting something functional out there and then improving it based on feedback.
Exactly. And that's where refactoring comes in.
Refactoring. What's that?
Refactoring is the process of improving the design of existing code without changing what it does.
So you're not adding new features, you're just making the existing code better.
Exactly.
Okay, I think I understand.
It's like cleaning up your closet. You're not getting rid of any clothes, you're just reorganizing them so they're easier to find.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
It makes the code more maintainable, easier to understand.
That makes sense.
So that when you do need to add new features or fix bugs, it's not like a nightmare.
Yeah, because I can imagine that with a large software project, with multiple people working on it, things could get messy really fast.
Oh, for sure.
So how do you even manage that? How do you keep track of all those changes and make sure everything stays organized?
That's where one of the most important tools in software development comes in. It's called version control.
Version control. Fill me in.
Imagine you have a bunch of people all working on the same code, all making changes to the same files.
Okay, yeah. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It would be total chaos without a way to, track those changes.
Right.
Merge them together, revert back to previous versions if you need to.
So version control is like a time machine for your code.
That's a great way to put it.
That's amazing.
It lets you see who changed what, when, why.
So you can go back and see how the code evolved over time.
Exactly. It also helps you manage different versions of the software.
Oh, right. Like, version 1.0, version 2.0, and so on.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
You can even experiment with new features without breaking the existing code. It's great for collaboration, too.
Wow. I'm starting to see how all of these pieces fit together.
Yeah, it all starts to come together.
You start with a clear vision, break it down, work iteratively, get constant feedback, use tools like version control to manage the complexity.
Right. It's a whole system.
And it's not just about software. It's about a mindset, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm already thinking about how I can use these principles in my own work and personal projects.
That's great. I think that's one of the most valuable things about this book. It
Yeah.
gives you a framework for thinking about problems and solving them.
Totally.
And that's applicable to so many different areas of life.
I'm really glad we chose this book for our deep dive today.
Me too. It's a good one.
It's been really eye-opening.
Yeah, it makes you think differently about things.
Definitely. So what do you say we take a quick break and then come back and delve even deeper into head-first software development?
Sounds good to me.
One thing that really stood out to me in the book is how much they emphasize testing.
Oh, yeah. Testing is huge.
It's not just something you do at the end, like a final check. It's woven into the entire process.
Absolutely. They really stress the importance of testing early and often.
It makes sense if you think about it.
Yeah.
Because the sooner you catch a problem, the easier it is to fix.
Exactly. You don't want those bugs to snowball into like major headaches down the line.
Right, because then you're spending all this time trying to untangle this huge mess instead of, actually building something new.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's much more efficient to catch those problems early on.
So let's talk about testing. The book mentions all these different levels of testing: black box testing, gray box testing, white box testing. I have to admit, it sounds a little intimidating.
Yeah, it can seem that way at first.
Can you break it down for me?
Sure. Think of it this way. Imagine you're trying to understand a complex machine.
Okay, like a really cool vintage jukebox.
Perfect. So black box testing is like interacting with that jukebox without knowing anything about its internal workings.
Okay.
You put in a coin, you select a song, and you see if the music plays.
So you're just focused on the inputs and outputs, basically.
Exactly. Does it do what it's supposed to do from the user's perspective?
Got it. So no need to understand the intricate mechanisms inside, just focus on whether it delivers the tunes.
Precisely. Now, gray box testing takes you a step closer. You have some knowledge of those internal mechanisms,
Okay.
but you're not testing every single gear and lever.
So you're peeking under the hood a little bit.
Exactly. You might see some of the components, but you're not taking the whole thing apart.
Got it.
And then white box testing is like having a complete schematic of the jukebox.
Okay.
You have full access to the code, or in this case, the inner workings of the machine, and you can test individual components and interactions.
So you're going from just listening to the music to peeking under the hood to actually understanding the entire blueprint.
That's a great way to put it.
And I can see how each level of testing would catch different types of problems.
Absolutely.
So are you constantly doing all these different types of tests throughout the development process?
Well, the book really emphasizes the importance of automating as much of this testing as possible.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Because can you imagine having to manually test every single feature every time you make a change to the code?
Oh my gosh, that would be a nightmare.
It would be so tedious and time-consuming.
Yeah.
That's where tools like testing frameworks and continuous integration servers come in.
Okay, tell me more about those.
They can actually run those tests for you automatically.
So it's like having a robot quality control inspector working 24/7.
Exactly. And these tools can even generate reports that show you, exactly what parts of the code have been tested and what hasn't.
Oh, wow. So you can see how thoroughly your code has been tested and identify any potential weak spots.
Precisely. It's like having a safety net,
Yeah.
to make sure you're not introducing new bugs as you're adding features or fixing existing ones.
Speaking of bugs, I think anyone who's ever used a computer has encountered a software bug at some point.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's just part of the experience.
That's inevitable, really.
So how do developers deal with bugs? Like, do they have special bug squashing team?
Well, the book actually uses the Beatbox Pro scenario again to illustrate this.
Oh, yeah, the music software.
Right. So imagine you've released version 1.0. It's a huge hit.
Okay.
But then you discover a critical security bug.
Oh, that's not good.
Not good at all.
What do you do?
Well, this bug could potentially allow hackers to access users' personal information.
So you need to fix it, like yesterday?
Exactly. But you're also already hard at work on version 2.0, which is packed with exciting new features.
So how do you manage both?
That's where version control comes in handy again.
Oh, right, the time machine for code.
Exactly. So version control allows you to create branches, which are basically separate copies of the code,
Oh, I see.
to manage these different versions.
So you can create a branch for version 1.0,
Right.
fix the security bug there, and release a patched version like 1.1 without disrupting the development of 2.0.
Exactly. It's a lifesaver in situations like this.
Wow, that's really clever.
It is. It's a really powerful tool.
So you've got these different branches for different versions,
Right.
and you're constantly testing, fixing bugs, adding new features.
It's a continuous process.
And the book also mentions something called system testing.
Oh, yeah, that's an important one.
What's the difference between that and the other types of testing we talked about, like black box, gray box, white box?
Well, system testing is where you test the entire system as a whole from the user's perspective. It's different from unit testing, where you're just testing individual components in isolation, or integration testing, where you're testing how different components work together.
So it's like making sure all the instruments in an orchestra are in tune and playing the right notes at the right time.
That's a great analogy. System testing ensures that all those pieces work together harmoniously to deliver the intended functionality.
That makes sense. You don't want your software to sound like a bunch of instruments all playing different tunes.
Exactly.
So when does system testing happen?
Well, the book recommends doing system testing in a separate iteration cycle from development.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you have one iteration for building features and then another iteration dedicated to testing them thoroughly.
So you're not trying to do everything at once.
Right. It's all about separating those concerns and making sure you're delivering a high-quality product.
That makes a lot of sense.
And once the system testing is complete, it's time for the iteration review.
Okay, what happens in the iteration review?
Well, it's basically where you gather feedback from the customer. Reflect on what went well during the iteration.
Okay.
What could be improved, what lessons you've learned, that kind of thing.
So it's a chance to celebrate successes, identify areas for improvement, and make adjustments for the next iteration.
Exactly. It's all about continuous learning and improvement.
This whole process sounds incredibly thorough and well-structured.
It is. And it's really designed to help teams deliver high-quality software in a predictable and efficient way.
I'm really starting to see the beauty of this iterative approach.
Yeah, it's a really powerful way to work.
It's not just about building software. It's about embracing this mindset of continuous learning and improvement.
Absolutely.
And that's a mindset that can be applied to any project, any goal, any aspect of life, really.
I completely agree.
I'm already thinking about how I can apply these principles to my own work and personal projects.
That's great. I think that's one of the most valuable things about this book.
It's really making me rethink how I approach things.
Yeah, it's a real eye-opener.
So, are we ready to move on to the final part of our deep dive into headfirst software development?
Let's do it. There's still so much more to uncover.
We've covered so much ground already. You know, everything from iterative development and user stories to the importance of testing and version control.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey through the world of software development.
I feel like I'm starting to see the world through a software developer's eyes now.
It's amazing how these concepts can shift your perspective, isn't it?
It really is. And we're not even done yet.
Not even close.
There's still more to explore in headfirst software development.
Oh yeah, plenty more.
So what's next on the agenda?
Well, we've talked a lot about wrapping up an iteration.
Right, getting all those features built and tested and ready to go.
But what about starting a new one? The book emphasizes that even if the previous iteration went smoothly, there's always room for improvement.
So you don't just, like, blindly charge ahead with the same assumptions and plans from the previous iteration.
Exactly. You don't want to just rinse and repeat.
You got to take a step back and reflect.
Exactly. The start of a new iteration is a chance to reevaluate your priorities.
Okay.
You know, refine your understanding of the customer's needs and adjust your plan accordingly.
Yeah, because things change, priorities shift,
Right.
and you might have learned some valuable lessons from the previous iteration.
Exactly. So you want to take all of that into account.
That makes sense.
And remember velocity, that measure of how much work a team can realistically accomplish.
Oh, right. Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
Well, at the start of a new iteration, you use that velocity to inform your planning.
So if your velocity was lower than expected in the previous iteration,
Right.
you might need to adjust your estimates for the new one.
Or maybe even scope down the work a bit.
And I imagine this is where communication with the customer is really crucial.
Absolutely. You need to have those open and honest conversations about what's achievable.
Right.
What trade-offs might need to be made.
You don't want to overpromise and underdeliver.
Exactly. Transparency and collaboration are key.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, let's talk about something that comes up a lot in software development, working with external software or libraries.
You mean like using code that someone else wrote?
Exactly. It's super common to leverage existing tools and resources, you know, things that you didn't build yourself.
Like using a third-party library for image processing or integrating with an external API for, I don't know, social media sharing?
Yeah, things like that.
So you're not reinventing the wheel every time?
Exactly. You can build on what others have already created.
But the book cautions against blindly trusting that external code.
Right. Just because someone else wrote it doesn't mean it's bug-free or perfectly suited to your needs.
So how do you mitigate that risk?
Well, ideally you'd become an expert in every piece of external software you use.
Right, but that's not always feasible.
No, definitely not.
So what's the alternative?
The key is to thoroughly test how your code interacts with that external software and be prepared to handle any unexpected behavior. You need to understand the limitations and potential risks involved.
So it's kind of like inviting a guest to your party, you know?
Okay, I like this analogy.
You might have a general idea of how they'll behave, but you still need to be prepared for surprises.
Exactly. You can't just assume everything will go perfectly.
Right, and this brings us to a really crucial point, I think.
Yeah, what's that?
The idea of taking ownership of your code, even if parts of it rely on external dependencies.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
The book has a great quote about this.
Oh, yeah. What is it?
It doesn't matter who wrote the code. If it's in your software, it's your responsibility.
Powerful stuff.
It really is. So you can't just point fingers at the third-party library if something goes wrong.
Right. You need to understand how that external code works, how it integrates with your system, and be prepared to troubleshoot any issues that arise.
Because ultimately, you're the one responsible for the software you deliver.
Exactly. And that leads us to the final chapter of the book,
Okay, the grand finale.
where the authors kind of step back and reflect on the bigger picture of software development.
So what are some of their key takeaways?
Well, they talk about the importance of having a process, but also being flexible and adaptable. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
The best process is the one that works for your team, your project, your specific circumstances.
So it's not about blindly following a rigid set of rules.
Right.
It's about finding what works best in each unique situation.
Exactly. And they also really encourage continuous learning and improvement.
Yeah, because the world of software development is always changing.
It's constantly evolving, so you got to stay curious, experiment with new tools and techniques.
Never stop learning.
Absolutely.
And honestly, I think that's great advice for any field, not just software development.
Yeah, I agree.
In a world that's changing so rapidly, the ability to adapt and learn and iterate is more valuable than ever.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into head-first software development, what are some key things you hope our listeners will take away from this conversation?
Well, I hope they'll see that these principles of software development, things like iteration, collaboration, testing, continuous improvement,
Right.
they're not just for techies, they're powerful tools that can be applied to any project, any goal, really.
Exactly. Whether you're building a software empire, launching a new business, or just trying to achieve a personal goal.
Right, the principles are the same.
Remember to embrace those principles, stay curious, and never stop iterating towards excellence.
Well said.
Well, thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating journey.
The pleasure was all mine. And to all our listeners out there, keep learning, keep growing, and keep building amazing things.
And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.